we're looking for in proposals, what you can use the time for, and hope that all of you will apply and have the information you need to put in the best application possible. Think so. Some folks have known about ICS before, and sort of the Institute has shifted over time, and so we want to be up to date with what we're looking for in proposals, how to make yours as strong as possible. And I've got with me, so I'm Jolie Sheffer, I'm director of the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society, and I have one current fellow, Dr. Lisa Hanasono, in the School of Media Communication, and two former fellows, Dr. Nancy Patterson in the College of Education and Human Development, and Dr. Sherry Wells Jensen, who's a faculty member in the Department of English with an expertise in linguistics. And so the two of them were fellows last year, and Lisa is currently. So they're good models, I think, for the kinds of things we're now really looking for. The fellowship program is a semester that you can get a leave from teaching and service responsibilities. And it is meant to be both teaching and service that you are free from, so that you really can focus on your research and on communicating that research to a wider audience. Those are really kind of the central tenets of the ICS fellowship. And the gist is, in our current state, this has been the case for since before my tenure. The fellowships themselves are actually paid for by the College of Arts and Sciences. But our Dean Craig, has basically agreed that the release funds can go to folks in any unit across campus. And what all the deans from whatever college you may be in agree to, and if you've looked at the past application, we've made some small changes to it for the coming year. We do ask that at the time of application, you get signatures from your chair and your dean, so they are aware that you're applying. They are aware of what the implications might be for them from staffing and financial points of view, so that we don't have a problem after you've been awarded one of then, oh my gosh, can I accept it, can I not? That we want those things sort of smoothed over from the get-go. And as I've said, but I really want to underscore, the key element of ICS fellowships, I'd say there's sort of three pieces. One is interdisciplinarity, that your work really is, you're talking about how you're bringing together different disciplines, and you're really thinking about how each of those disciplines might be transformed through your methodological approach, right? So that's a key piece. Collaboration is another key piece, and that's related to the public engagement piece of this. So really thinking about how can your work reach into the community? How can it help transform maybe social justice work or community work? And how might your research in turn be deepened, complicated, enriched through meaningful collaboration with a community partner? And we don't expect that all of the applications sort of have those partnerships in place. That is something that I, as director with the exec board, can help you think through and figure out. But the goal is, during that fellowship period, there is sort of a meaningful connection between academic work and sort of larger community concerns. And that can be about informing people about key issues that you're studying from a scholarly point of view, but you want to make them rethink history in a more complicated way. Or it might be much more deeply engaged with a particular community partner. We can talk about all of those things. So before I'm going to stop talking, and I want you to hear from some of our current and former fellows about their experience and kind of how they pitched their projects and what they accomplished. So Sherry, will you start us off?
Golly, okay. So I think that the thing that struck me about this whole application process, and the thing that I really liked, was the opportunity to write about the research that I wanted to do in a way that was really meaningful to me, as opposed to a way that I thought some journal would like. So I took sort of the standard way I would write about something, and I put all my adjectives back in. I put all the. I really think this is important because I put myself back into the work, where I think usually we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we seem scholarly, and although it was still a scholarly endeavor, certainly, but I was allowed / encouraged to write about it as if I really gave a damn. And since I do, that was easy. But I mean, I think just releasing those reasons, trying to remember why I'm in this field in the first place and why I loved it and why I wanted to spend my life doing this work. Being able to write about it as if it were a real thing that I love instead of a dry academic thing that I would like some journal to publish so I can, check that piece off. So, without going into the whole, my whole application, the details of which are probably unimportant right now, but just the opportunity to really care and to unapologetically really care about the work that I'm doing was such a delight, and to be with a group of people that also cared a lot about their work and really meant it when they said they were in it for a reason. So I think that's the first thing, and maybe the most important thing that I have to say about that application. And I think that that's genuinely appreciated. And Jolie also suggested I talk about what I got out of it, and I think the primary thing for me was just time. I had some goals and I did some things. I did many things I didn't expect to do. Partly because I had time, and one of the dangers, or one of the things that I think turns being a professor into a job that you don't like, or a job that stresses you out, is the lack of time. Time to sit with people and talk to them about ideas. Just really, honestly, not, we're going to go to a conference, I'm going to do a paper, but time to go find someone on campus that you think is doing things that you want to learn about, and just sit with them and talk. It was a lot of time to think about why I was doing the things I was doing, and then I accumulated over the semester a lot of writing obligations. I didn't finish the writing obligations during my semester, but I have them now. And I think for me, that was a really good use of my time. I would not say that I got, quote, tons done in the productivity sense, but I decompressed and I learned 1,000 things that I can't easily express, and it reminded me why academia is a good thing, I guess.
But I've always done action research, so I wouldn't say it's rigorous, but it's always been community connected research that I've done. So this was such a perfect fit for me already. My study was called At the Schoolhouse Gates: High School Students' Perceptions of Their First Amendment Rights. So I needed access to schools, and I was the president of a state organization that had many connections to schools. And I'm also a person who trains teachers, so I had a lot of contacts already, and it just enabled everything. So I was able to visit 10 different school districts, talk to 10 of my teachers who are now alums and grads and my colleagues in the field. And so I was able to tie together some service in that. It just made a lot of sense. So about 150 kids that I was able to talk to, and there would have been no chance, no opportunity for me to do that unless I did a different, quit and did another PhD. In my presentation, I actually called it, "But I want to say what I want to say," and I got a lot of really interesting different types of people at the presentation. It was at the high school. The students knew that the presentation was happening, and some came.
So you had students there, you had the
Teachers.
you had school board members, teachers, the superintendent.
Bullitt Board of Education.
Yeah. So it's as an opportunity to not only sort of report back on that research, but have it go to the very people who you've studied, and I think was incredibly powerful.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was full circle for me.
This has been already a rejuvenating and just fantastic experience. And it's been great to hear what Sherry and Nancy have done as I'm following really big footsteps and trying to be as productive as possible in this time. But I wanted to turn the tables and give you just like 10 seconds for a second and to think, what would you do if you were not teaching for a semester? You did not have to go to oodles and oodles of committee meetings and didn't necessarily have that service component. You had an entire semester. What would you do with that time? I think each of us have a different answer to that, and I'll talk a little bit about what I'm doing. But what I wanted to do was to take that and then reconnect it back to you, because I think you're here in terms of starting to think about what would that vision be like for you, and how can you put your own unique fingerprints on the work that you're doing. I agree that the idea of time is so liberating, especially because we become so saturated, our schedules become so filled with all of this stuff. And this particular, I think, aside from sabbatical or FIL, this is one of the best things I think that any faculty member could ever be so lucky to have. And it seems like the time does go really fast. So what I want to do is briefly talk about what I'm doing this semester, and then talk about the proposal, because it's still somewhat fresh in my head. It's been less than a year since I was crunching and trying to finalize my pitch to ICS. So my particular project is, I'm focusing on what I call the M word. So I'm focusing on miscarriage and pregnancy loss. As a communication scholar, there has been some work on it, but the idea is that pregnancy loss and miscarriage is surprisingly pervasive. 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage. It's affecting millions and millions of people, their loved ones and their partners, but people aren't talking about it. And it's relevant across different disciplines in terms of bringing in health issues, bringing in social support, bringing in communication. But at the end of the day, why aren't we talking about it, and how can we provide better support and do better in terms of this particular issue? And so I'm moving from a more calm perspective, but then connecting with multiple disciplines. And so I'm proposing, or I'm working on finishing up an interview study, which will become a journal article. I am currently analyzing some data looking at how miscarriage is and is not engaged in popular pregnancy books. So the idea is many women who get pregnant are consulting these, what to expect while you're expecting, and seeing how miscarriage and pregnancy loss is conveyed, if at all, in these particular texts, and what we can do with that. So I'm doing that particular study, and then I'm starting to put together a book proposal for an edited volume. The idea is hopefully I will get to pitch that toward the end of the semester, the early 2019, to a particular publisher. I'm aiming at Demeter Press in an edited volume to invite women and their partners to share their own stories and experiences with pregnancy loss, and to have a space for that. And so that's the scope of my particular set of projects. So now that you know what I'm doing, what I want to do is kind of bring it back to you in terms of thinking about the application process. And of course, I know you'll hear more about it, but for me, there were kind of a set of primary tips and secondary tips that were at the forefront of my mind. They helped for me. It may or may not help for you. But for the biggest thing that I thought about as I was writing this was to be persuasive. I think a lot of times with academics, we think we need to inform people about what we're doing, and that's certainly, I think, a component. But at the end of the day, this is such a sweet gig, and it's really competitive, and a lot of people want it. So the idea is, how can I make mine bubble to the surface? And it's really an art of persuasion. And I think it's only 1,000 words, so it's a very succinct, careful art of persuasion. And so we want to make sure, how is it significant, whatever you're doing, why does it matter? And connecting to ICS, how, in what ways is it interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary? So kind of really highlighting the so what aspect of it. The second thing that I think was really, I took a lot of time to think about, was the feasibility. Because sometimes, you want to do it all, hashtag all the things, but then the semester goes surprisingly fast. I'm not sure if Sherry and Nancy would concur, but it goes really, really fast. And so I included a timeline in mind in terms of when I would start this project, wrap this up, when I would start this project and wrap it up. And so a very short timeline to just kind of to envision what that would look like. In addition, I had data collected, so I don't know if 3 projects is a lot for a semester, but my one project is nearly done because I had already collected a bunch of interviews. So it's really the front part. So September is more or less finishing up this project that I'm working on, and so I think that made perhaps my proposal a little bit more palatable insofar as, like, yes, that's going to get done. If all I have to do is finish the results in the discussion. And then the final thing, which I'm hoping maybe we'll discuss a little bit more, is thinking about how it connects with the broader community. I love this about the ICS, and I think under Jolie's directorship, there's been a stronger interest in really finding the so what as it connects to our scholarship and our community. So how can your work resonate with BG, with BGSU, with different stakeholders? And I think in many ways that makes the work even more valuable. And I'm hoping maybe Nancy and Sherry might talk about that as well. I'd love to hear what you're doing, but thinking about it. So ultimately my primary tip is to be persuasive and succinct. But in terms of secondary tips, things that I did in the preparation process, I reviewed previously funded applications. That was really helpful. Obviously, I'm not doing what they're doing, but just seeing how people structure. And a big shout out to Dr. Ellen Grosevsky, who was so kind to kind of be a mentor in that process. It just really helps to see what the scope and focus and formatting. So if you've got some exemplars, that's helpful. Receiving feedback from mentors is very helpful. And then communicating with your director and chair early on and letting them know, I'm interested in doing this, talking about the value of it, because for them, it's kind of like, ooh, I have to find someone to cover your classes. Ooh, you might not be able to serve on these committees. So finding a way to positively frame that so they're on board and getting their buy-in.
And I can help with that.
Yes. Which is great. And most of them, it's a really prestigious thing, so a lot of them are really, but making sure they're good to go so that's not a last-minute barrier. I mentioned about getting ahead if you've got some good inertia, highlighting how you've got that inertia as in the application if you do. And then the final thing is just being as concrete and avoiding the jargon, so to speak. So for me, one example about being concrete was for this first article that I'm doing, I had in mind a specific journal outlet that I'm going to shop it to. And so it was like, I'm going to write a paper, but I'm going to write a paper on this, and I'm aiming to submit it to this journal, and that kind of helped to, I think, make it more concrete. So I'm not sure if those were helpful, but those are some tips that I kept in my mind as I was moving forward with the project.
And one thing to keep in mind is so this is my third year as director, and so this is, so the first group of fellows came in under when I wasn't overseeing the application process, right? And then now this year will be the second time I have really managed that application process. And so the applications have changed a bit in each year. We keep making tweaks and things. So one thing we'll do is there's a sign-in sheet. If you sign in today, we will email you 4 or 5 samples of folks who were funded that we thought had great proposals. And you'll see they're quite different, and sometimes they're being asked different things. So just know that they're not all the same because the application and some of the priorities have shifted somewhat. But I think what they all have in common was the ability to really make a case that this was interesting, provocative, important work, that we could see that, oh yeah, not just, I'm sure someone out there cares about that, but I care about that. I felt all of us reading it felt hailed by that application. It's yes, I can see how that's a problem. Yes, I can see how this work can meaningfully reframe or shift knowledge on this subject. And so I think, thinking about the so what in the widest sense, and it sort of goes against a lot of what gets ingrained over the course of peer review and publication, where we get narrower and narrower and drier and drier. And I think Sherry put that really well as sort of going back to what drew you to the stuff in the first place. So that's really important. And I think one of the things that I've seen is some of the best applications this year were ones who it was their second time around. That the first application was interesting, but still felt very kind of jargony or very oriented within a particular disciplinary field. And those folks who really heard the feedback of, we're interested in this, but it's not yet kind of giving the big pitch. So one of the folks who can't be here because he's actually at a 2-week silent tech-free writing retreat in England is Arna Spoor, who he did that, and he is a Renaissance music historian, and he's doing work on Renaissance court musicians and composers that he has found in his research who were, many of them, formerly enslaved people, right, who then become court musicians and then composers. And so the first time around it was like, this is fascinating, but it was still very much framed in relationship to kind of music history. And the project sort of didn't frame itself in as engaging a way. He came back, and this time it was sort of all about, right, how do we totally rethink what we know about classical music and who was doing it, and not only who was performing it, but how some of those musicians and composers were in fact inflecting classical music with African rhythms and traditions. That was a much more compelling, persuasive project. And so working with him to develop ideas on how to reframe that, this time around, it was a no-brainer. And he's talking out, I'm talking with him about what those community engagement activities might look like. And one of the ideas we have, he's going in the spring, we have a little more time to develop it, is he's reaching out to the Toledo Orchestra's Youth Symphony. He has a previous life as a high school teacher. So that age group is something he's comfortable with, familiar with, and how might it really affect young musicians to think differently about the music they're playing and who wrote it and that history. So that's some of the kinds of things that I've been really drawn to. I mean, it's a pleasure to read these applications. I wish we could fund them all, but the ones that really have risen to the top are the ones who are able to step back out of that kind of academic disciplinary framing and really be persuasive about why is this topic and this research so compelling, and how are some ways of putting this knowledge back into the community and translating that for audiences. I know many faculty sort of continue to work with their graduate students during this time, but they might not take on new folks during the period. We've also done things
similar to what a person would do who's going on FIS.
Yes, I think very similar. And the idea is to sort of lessen your responsibilities, so it might be negotiating with those. So I can't give you a sort of a blanket statement of this is what our policy is, but I encourage you, and I work with you and the chair to sort of come up with what is a way to prioritize your research in this time without, in those circumstances where you might have a long relationship with a student, without leaving them high and dry entirely. And it might be encouraging the second reader on the committee for that semester period to sort of function as first reader, where you might not read things until their one draft has been sort of revised already. Things like that would be my recommendation, but I'd be happy to work, with the fellow and their chairs or directors to kind of formalize that.
I kept my honors students, and I found someone else to be the mentor of one of the new faculty. So I think you got to take a really careful look, because things can stay that you could let go of.
Yeah.
And so many new things happen that the more you can set aside for just the time, the better.
Do you have anything you want to add to that, Sherry?
I was just thinking about all the things that I was asked to do even though I wasn't supposed to, and all the good saying no practice I got, which was really fun. And I thought, well, there are things I felt like I should do, and then I thought again and realized that I'm quite replaceable on almost everything, which is great.
Yeah, it's actually kind of liberating, right? To feel like, we actually aren't the only person who can do some of
Yes,
this.
and that has stayed with me. I think it's one of the things I took away from this whole experience. Is the last couple of things I was asked to do, I still am saying no. It's great.
And I have had this where I think the examples in the short time I've done this were mostly when it was College of Arts and Sciences deans or chairs or directors who don't have as much experience with folks having the ICS fellowship, and so kind of thought, well, you're released from the teaching, but you're still going to do all the service. And I mean, I am happy to be the the enforcer there, and I've done that, you know, stepping in and writing the email and meeting in person with those, administrators to say, here's why, here's the application, here's why we, if you have any questions about why we do this way, but there are, down the road, this is going to reap benefits. And that's one of the things that I have really made the case for, is that the benefit of these community engagement activities really will come back into your units. They're separate processes and timelines. And so if you are, the easy thing to do is, if you know that you can only afford, for time, finances, whatever, to do a 1 semester FIL, absolutely also apply for the ICS. You have absolutely nothing to lose. If you're thinking about if you think you can swing a full year FIL, don't plan on doing that and applying to ICS and then switching to the semester FIL. Basically, because of the timeline and the processes for the way the university does FILs, they're likely to say you can't switch, because they want people to take the full year because of the financial savings, right? Like, to be really frank, that's how it works. So, we've had it in the past where someone applied for full year FIL and ICS, got the ICS, but, well, you were not the only one. This has happened to multiple people. And then the choice is either give up the ICS and maybe reapply the following year, and hope that the project is that much better and stronger and more developed, or defer the FIL for a year. So I don't want folks to be in the position where you have a terrible choice to make. So you're going to have to really think about, like, do you roll the dice and hope that maybe you'll end up with both a single semester FIL and the ICS? If that works out, fantastic.
So good.
Right? That's so great. But because we're not dovetailing these processes, I can't advise that as a strategy. I think that if you're thinking about connecting communities across BGSU that don't necessarily talk to each other or see the implications of that, there's real potential there. And I think, you had emailed me before this, so, talking with the CCCE and their voting initiatives, right? Thinking about the relationship to political science and, like, really stressing kind of the interdisciplinarity and how it might look differently to think about this project, not just doing the kind of quantitative research you've done, but maybe doing some focus groups with students on campus. Maybe also thinking about not just our campus, but I'm thinking about, like, a campus like the University of Michigan or others that might have greater racial and ethnic diversity, and thinking about how, maybe doing some qualitative stuff there. If you've got a sort of the quantitative stuff, you have big data sets for that, accompanying that, and how does this project look different and have more meaningful impact, and how, like, V. Rosser administers, the voting process here with this data. Then I think you're in the direction of really doing something.
So first of all, I just want to encourage you to sort of think about some of Jolie's suggestions, because I too, I've done mixed methodological work before, but my project is about mothers running for political office in 2018, and I'm doing, and why am I interested in that topic? Because I've done a lot of big data set quantitative research, and I've studied it about how women are disadvantaged on the campaign trail. I've done all kinds of quantitative coding of press coverage and everything. So my interest in this topic sprung from what I know about loads of quantitative research on the disadvantages women have on the campaign trail. But to me, the quantitative data only goes so far, and so I feel like what's missing in the literature is the qualitative, very rich detail that you can get from what I'm doing, which is participant observation. So, and I think and in my own project, it's there's a fit with the mission in terms of it being a study like on the ground in the field of gender-based stereotypes, and there's connection to community organizations because I think like League of Women Voters, all kinds of pop-up women groups after the 2018 general election are going to be interested in these kinds of issues. So let me just say that before Jolie spoke and you described, I thought focus groups.
Yeah.
Like that's what's missing because I too, from the political science angle, am very familiar with lots of quantitative research that's available on political engagement and voter turnout, and that is so low. And what's missing in that literature is like really talking to students, and in particular as well, the missing piece about some unstudied groups like Asian Americans are really understudied in the quantitative literature because you never have enough when you're doing random sample data. I'm so sorry, I'm like going on and on. I'm just, there aren't enough.
I know each person here I think is in a different stage in your career, but something else that I think was helpful in developing, because the proposal, there's so much license as to where you're going, what you want to do, is to think about how this fits within your broader research program and your career trajectory. So if you're moving toward full, what specific things can this time afford you to move in that particular direction? Or if you're moving toward tenure, what might that be? Or if you have full and you want to move in a completely different direction now and reinvent, what might that be? But I think that was something that in the morning, when I wake up, it gets me extra excited about doing this particular work. And so having that connect with the broader you, whatever that might be, I know y'all are doing really cool things. So, but yeah, I'm thinking triangulating this with also that bigger picture.
One of the things that with Lisa we're talking about, because Lisa is part of this year's group, were the first that they had to, in addition to talking about a public lecture, really work on, propose an activity, like a smaller community engagement activity. And so since Lisa's this fall, we're, it's coming up, we're talking about it. And one of the things we're talking about is having her share her work with OBGYNs and nurse practitioners, right? Folks who are on the front line, like that is not normally the audience for your scholarship, right? But like, what might it do to have, it might be 10 people in a room, we're not necessarily talking about a huge room, but how might that impact clinical practice to be thinking about some of these findings, right? That's a totally new kind of thing, but I'm really excited about those sorts of, community engagement activities, right? So we want public lectures, we want sort of broad audience for volume, but we also want to think about what could be small, meaningful partnerships that could just be transformative in those organizations, but also for your scholarship. Like, who knows, like, if a partnership might not develop out of that. That's exciting. So the public lecture does have to happen in the semester of the fellowship, but, we've even talked with one of the other fellows this semester is Dr. Laura Langle, and so she's going to give her talk in November. But she's doing work on human trafficking and issues in Costa Rica, and like NGOs, sort of how they, and religious NGOs, sort of how they attempt to address this crisis. And in January, it's like Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and she wants to do a regional symposium. So that's going to extend beyond the fall. So not everything has to. The public lecture has to happen in the semester, but we can work with you on if you have an idea for a community engagement activity where the timing might be better for either or both partners at a different time, as long as it sort of still happens close enough in span that it's sort of building on the momentum. That would be fine. Some of the mistakes that I can recall are basically submitting the book proposal as the application, because that's not what this fellowship is about. And so there were fabulous research proposals, but that's not what we're asking for. And so I think that's number one, is folks who are like, oh, every application is the same. I can just, I just need the abstract, or you'll read 12 pages because that's the version I have. Like, no, thank you, right? Part of the reason we've done this 1,000 word thing is to sort of force you, how could, like, what is your elevator version of your project, right? Like that. So that's number one, is don't just give us your disciplinary kind of book proposal version. We got jargon related to that. I think when the interdisciplinary nature is at sort of the first stage where it's more additive, like I'm going to put this and this together, and without the sort of next step of how does putting them together kind of reframe that knowledge for both disciplines, right? I think really spelling that out is important, because lots of people say, oh, I do interdisciplinary work because I look at pictures and text. It's like, that. We want you to sort of take it further than that. I think, folks who really give some thought to the community engagement piece in terms of like, what would be organizations or communities of people that, wow, would be great to reach out to, that like, how would they, learn from this scholarship in a different way? Or how might it really then not just be like the sage on the stage, I will give my knowledge to this community, but like what kinds of relationship could it start or build on? Some folks may already have well-developed community relationships. You can choose, you can say either if you don't have a strong preference, right? If you know that you're applying for like fall FIL and you're only applying for semester FIL, and so it's spring, you would want it for ICS, you can indicate that. Or if there are other reasons, like if, for Melissa, if it's tied to an election cycle and you want to be spending the semester leading up to it, or if it's the data app, you get to decide. So basically,
And actually, I'll just say, it's kind of funny, like there may be an idiosyncratic reason. Like for me, I'm like, my results are embargoed until after the election. So I've been on the campaign trail, but I can't reveal, and I can't, even though I'm protecting the confidentiality, like it's too sensitive. So that was like a really idiosyncratic reason, like mine has to be in the spring because I can't be giving any public talk.
Yeah, and it's worked. I mean, we haven't had an issue. Generally, in the couple of years that I've been doing this, there are some folks who say either semester, and some folks who have a very, a clear preference, and it's worked out to be able to combine that. So the folks who have a clear preference haven't all wanted the same semester, because people tend to have different reasons. And some of it is some folks want the spring and then to go into the summer, like that works better for them. Others may, the fall may be preferable. So it hasn't been an issue so far, but yes, you just sort of say one or the other or either.